Next, generic server policies. That's going to be a little bit more work. Because when I go into my server tab, I see that I have a lot more policies to cover. Now, the most important ones are things like the BIOS policy. What can I set here? Basically anything that you can set in the BIOS itself. So I'm just going to call it the BIOS policy. And one thing that is very important here is quiet boot. Remember, if you're booting your Cisco UCS Blade, you will see that huge Cisco logo. When you take over the KVM session, instead of seeing the memory and the CPU type and stuff, you see a big Cisco logo. Actually, they changed that with the B200 M3. If you run an older version of the M3, so the M2 or the M1 even still, you will see that huge logo. To disable that enormous Cisco logo, I can disable quiet boot here. And that means that I will get diagnostics. That's something that I would probably want. Now, for the other things, don't worry about them a lot. If they want you to configure this, they will tell you what setting you need to set exactly. It's no use in remembering all this, of course. Now, an important configuration is, where is it? If I'm running boot from SAN to my server, and I still have local disks in my system, I will probably want to disable them, right? So in my personal lab, I have a UCS with some disks, but I want to do boot from SAN. So when that RAID controller is booting up, it checks for disks and it checks for its RAID configuration and stuff. That's taking time in the boot. So if I want to make the boot session a lot faster, I can disable the RAID controller here. That's actually a very interesting option here. Skip the whole RAID controller during boot and just disable it totally. That's what I also can do here. And finish that. Next up, maintenance policy. What is a maintenance policy? Now, there is a stupid default in the UCS system, and this has to do with how we run changes on the system. So, of course, when I change things like the MAC address of a VNIC, when I change the UUID of the server, when I add another network interface card into the server, that's going to require a reboot, right? So that is what they call a disruptive change or an impacting change. So things that I need to do to reboot the server are called impacting changes or disruptive changes. So those things require me to reboot the server. Now, like I told you already, if I have an updating service profile template, then that change in the template is going to be an automatic change towards all of the connected service profiles. Then the default response of the UCS system is to immediately reboot all three of these servers. So I lose my whole VMware environment just with one click. That's dangerous, right? It's going to warn you for this, but who reads warning messages, right? Everybody just clicks on yes and moves on. I've had many customers who rebooted their entire UCS system with this. So that default, it's a stupid default by the way, but that default can be changed with what they call a maintenance policy. With a maintenance policy, I can change this behavior to, instead of immediately rebooting, because as you can see, that is the default policy, I can create a new policy or change the default policy and say, No, I want to acknowledge this per server. So I do not want to acknowledge the change for the template. No, I want to acknowledge the change for the whole server, or for every server independent. To make sure that every server that I need to reboot, I can take that out of service manually in VMware, set it in maintenance mode, then let that single server reboot, bring it back up again, do the next server. This is what you want. Or I can even specify a timer where I can say reboot in midnight today or midnight on Saturday night. All those things I can cover in a schedule, but user ag is usually what you want. And that's what I specify for my maintenance policy. Then the next policy to cover is the local disk policy. What I do with this is configure the RAID controller in the server. So I have a couple of disks in the server that I want to have in a RAID setup. So this is what I do. I can set the RAID configuration here for my local disks. No local storage means I do not have disks in my server. If you still have disks in your server and you're trying to apply this policy to that server, it's going to fail the association. So you really have to have a server without disks in them to apply the no local storage mode. So if you have disks in your server, but you still want to do boot from SAN, set it to any configuration. And that just leaves the disks alone and doesn't touch them. And then go into your BIOS policy and set the RAID controller to disabled, then you will not see your disks in the system. So, but that no local storage is an important one because the association will fail if you still have disks in the system. I'm going to set it to any, which is actually the default as well. Then I have a scrub policy. A scrub policy has only use when I take a service profile off a server. So when I disassociate the service profile from the hardware. That means, do I need to format the disk and do I want to erase the BIOS settings when doing that? So format disks and erase BIOS settings. That's what I can set here in my scrub policy. I'm going to set it no, do not scrub. That's actually also the default, not scrub anything. And then I get to two firmware packages. And in UCS 2.1, this has been migrated into one package. That's all migrated into the host firmware package. With my firmware packages, as I mentioned earlier, I can control the software version of my blade. So that means that in this host firmware package, I can specify exactly what is the BIOS or the network card version that I want to have. So this is, if the lab is asking you to create a host firmware package, it means know exactly what kind of components do I have available in my system. So do I have a Palo card or do I have a VIC-1240? All of these things need to be noted down here. Or do I have an Emulex card here? That's what I need to specify here as well, right? The M71KR Emulex or the M71KR QLogic. That's what I need to know. Is it an M71 or an M72 or maybe an M73 card? All of these things can be found on the server settings. So in the server inventory. So if I go here to my equipment tab, I go down to the servers and I click on inventory again, then here I can see exactly what kind of things I have. So when I go to adapters, then I see a product number, but that doesn't give me anything. I need to go into the adapter itself to see that this is an M81KR adapter. And for the other things, go back to my server inventory. if I would have an Emulex card, it would show up here at HBAs and NICs, for example. And for storage, what is the RAID controller that I have? This is the SAS 1064E. Write this down. What is the RAID controller in my disks? How many disks do I have? I see 2 disks in the system. Looks good. And then what is the blade itself? This is a B200M2 blade. So these things you need to want to write down. So there's not a single overview. You need to do this per server. But I'll promise you there will not be 64 servers in the lab. It will be 1, 2, 3, or 4 servers. I don't see them adding more servers to it because it would defeat the point of having multiple servers. So just write them down for that number of servers that you have. So B200M2 is the type. I have a Cisco adapter. Actually, if you're upgrading memory, this is a very good picture when you need to upgrade things. That's just on the side note. And write down the RAID controller. That's one thing more important. Now then back to our storage configuration. All my servers are the same in my case. So I have an M81KR. I do not have a VIC-1240. So I can set exactly what is the version of software that I want to run on this particular adapter. I want to run the 205B. The BIOS version, different per server type. I only have B200M2 blades, so that's the only checkbox that I'm going to set. And I'm going to run the 205 BIOS version. So what they're going to say here to you is run the latest version, for example. And then just check the highest version number to select that. Or maybe they even have only one image installed. A board controller is only available on the full width blades. So in the lab we only have half width blades, so don't care about the board controller. I can run a specific Emulex card as a fiber channel only card. But more importantly, do not forget your RAID controller. That is that 1064E RAID controller. And let's just run this version. And I'm going to call this firmware package. Now there is one item in the server that I did not specify here. And that is the SIMC. The SIMC is configured in a separate firmware package. So I select the right blade number again, and then I can select what the CIMC version needs to be. That is the management firmware package. So any component related to the server itself, like the adapter and the RAID controller, are configured in the host firmware packages. And in the management firmware package, I specify the SIMC version. So that is placement policies, and that is firmware packages, disk configurations. That's all the policies that I want to show you. So we finished our next step, and that is server-wide policies.